In 2017, a man by the name of Richard Dawson, hailing from Newcastle in the UK, started an ambitious trilogy of albums. Spanning from 2017 to 2022, Richard Dawson released 3 records, all unified by a single concept, being time. Peasant being a record of the past, 2020 being a record of the present, and the Ruby Chord being a record of the future. You may also be familiar with Richard Dawson from his collaboration with the Finnish band Henki Circle in 2021, an unlikely combo that produced a progressive psych rock experience. And despite being released between 2020 and the Ruby Chord, it's not a part of this trilogy. Anyway, going through all 3 installments of this series would make for an incredibly long video, so for now I'll just stick to the first one. Peasant is set in early medieval Britain, specifically in the kingdom of Brunech in the period between the 5th and 7th centuries. The territory of Brunech is what today contains, among other things, Newcastle, where Richard Dawson is from. Brunech, or Benicia as some may call it as well, was first settled by the Anglians around the 5th century. The Anglians were a tribe of Germanic peoples coming from northern Germany, as well as some southern parts of Denmark, where I'm from. And a bit of etymology for you, they're also the Anglo part of the Anglo-Saxons, and it's also there England got its name. The first reliably historical king was a man by the name of Ida, who reigned for 12 years. And I don't know how quick the rate of return on kings usually are around this time, but Brunech went through 8 kings in the span of 69 years, which seems very fast. After Ida died, his brother Glappa took over and bit the dust in only a year. Fucking Glappa, man. I swear to God, these old English names are so... I mean, just look at the names of the rest of these kings. Ada, Ethelric, Theodric, Thrithelwald, Husa, and Ethelfrith. Like, what's up with the last one? They took Ethelric and Thrithelwald and did a fusion dance, apparently. But with this historical context in mind, the kings with goofy names, the farmers had just hit a breakthrough in plow technology, but had not yet invented the horseshoe, I think we're ready to dive into Peasant. In medieval Europe, heralds were sort of messengers for the king and nobility in general. Typically, the arrival of a herald was announced by glorious fanfares of horns, but the herald of our story is met with quite the opposite. Politically speaking, the time this record takes place in is a very confusing one. It's directly following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and a country that was once under powerful rule shattered into chaos. And suddenly Britain was filled with small kingdoms all over the place, Brunech being just one of many. A humble around this time it was probably hard to sort of keep up with what kingdom you even belonged to anymore. And for messengers like the herald, it must have been just as confusing to keep up with all these damn kingdoms. Heralds were functionally an early version of diplomats, basically, and I think this general notion of unstable and confusing politics works just as well now as it did 16 centuries ago. Expectations are rarely met. One anticipates a fanfare and all they get is a disconnected band of horns struggling to even play their instruments. And despite the lackluster welcome, I like to imagine the herald had something to say. Hear ye, hear ye. Somebody once told me that the world is going to roll me. In the kingdom of Britain, virgin on a bloody group of cocaine. This first full song tells the tale of a town haunted by the impending doom of an ogre attack. And I think this is the message that this aforementioned herald brought. There comes frightful news from town of great evil about the heartbroken Martha's idiot boy was smashed from the spec field. The village quickly devolves into panic and madness upon the news, and without any sort of confirmation of who did it, they just assume that it must have been an ogre who took this child, and they start anticipating a full ogre attack. Tie the goats to my cart with tansy rods, their faces cover, push straws into the windows, damp the coals,
and bar the door with hornbeam.
They begin to take desperate measures to protect themselves, putting out their fires and sacrificing staying warm just to avoid this ogre. They barricade their doors with hornbeam, a type of very tough wood, and wear masks of tansy, a plant historically used for pest control. In this next verse, the narrator's own son is taken now.
I am woke and I see weeds by a drama coming from the wood. Beans are snapping of stems and a foul-smelling broom. Paralyzed, I watch my child's breath glide like a jellyfish across the black morning.
By the description here, it seems to be a very cold night, so cold that one's breath is visible in the air. So despite it probably being harsh winter around when this is happening, they deprive themselves from the heat of fire. Something they did to avoid this ogre, but seems it didn't even care. And this sets off something in the townsfolk. They go on a full pursuit of this ogre that is surely the problem. They train their dogs to know its scent based on some slime they found, and this sends them traveling all the way to the sea, all with no sign of this ogre. As you could probably tell from my skeptic tone, I don't believe this ogre is a real thing, not even in universe, you know? The ogre is more of a scapegoat that the townsfolk blame on all their misfortune. The crimes described in this song could very well be committed by humans instead. In fact, by the very townsfolk themselves. The narrator's son was likely kidnapped by like a human trafficker or something instead. In fact, the townsfolk themselves are also pictured as grotesque, even before the announcement of the ogre at all. I mean, just listen to the second verse.
Bring the goose, my child. I carve an option to the squirming post. It smells like a smithy. Hurry now and drink the bowl before it congeals.
I'm not saying that drinking blood to survive is depraved or anything, but it's more just the grotesque way it's talked about and described, right? The narrator could have said, I cut the goose's throat like a normal person, but instead he says, I carve a notch into the squirming post. Also, need I remind you, at the second that they hear that a child has been kidnapped by someone, they proceed to just call him an idiot boy. The townsfolk simply can't see that this fabled ogre is among them. And again, as we'll see with a lot of this record actually, there's a parallel you can draw to modern day here. I mean, xenophobia is a very real thing. I hope I'm not the first one to tell you about that. It's the prototypical notion of those dang immigrants coming and taking our jobs, right? It's the people who blame every problem in society on immigrants and foreigners in general. The people who insist that they be thrown out of the country even though they're not the issue. And I guess it stems from this urge of needing something to blame, and it's easy to just point to one group and say they're the problem. They're the reason for all this, even though most of the time it's much more complicated than that. This next song is perhaps a bit more of a simpler tale. A soldier is far away from home and he's achingly missing his lover. He seems to be anxious for the battle soon to come.
My fellows bristling with anticipation, I slurp among their supper bowls. Shoveling it in, I don't taste a thing, only a memory of kisses spilled upon my chin. I am tired, I am afraid, my heart is full of dread.
He can't even taste his own food. All he can think of is his lover. He's afraid of dying, of course. Not so much in losing his life in general, but more so the fact that he wouldn't be able to see his lover again. Furthermore, he seems to not even be quite sure who or what he's even fighting against.
In the morning we march across the sea to the sunken monastery to face our faceless enemy.
He starts to see how contradictory war itself is. The cryptic lines of marching on the sea to see a sunken monastery shows this rather well. Upon realizing this, in combination with his all-consuming fears, he decides to desert his duties as a soldier and escapes in the cover of night.
The rolling fields grow dark as the grave, and I am running for my life, a vow to never draw another blade. Let's betroth without delay, pack the horse and ride away, find some better place where we might raise a family.
And he is finally reunited with his lover. He dreams of a good life, one without bloodshed, and where he once felt dread, he now replaces it with hope.
My heart is full of hope. I am tired and I am afraid. My heart is full of hope.
But even so, he is still tired and afraid, despite having hope. Desertion, or fleeing from one's military duties, has historically been punishable by execution. So even if he successfully starts his new life, there's always the uncertainty of someone coming for him. The tale of the traumatized soldier yearning for home is as old as war itself. During the Vietnam War, 500,000 soldiers deserted their posts. And still to this day, in time of war, people who desert can still get the death penalty. Be it a yearning to go home or a disillusionment of what one is fighting for, the horrors of war have been and will always have people terrified. Soldier is a song that really hits emotionally. Despite the soldier's experiences being far removed from today, there's just something very human in the way he talks about it. We are all soldiers in our mental wars, so to speak. We all have our anxieties, and we just have to find our way out of them, however hard it may be. Weaver to me is a song about the joy of creation. The song opens with a rather detailed description of a weaver dyeing their fabrics. And there's a very specific attention to detail in this whole sequence, especially regarding the materials the weaver is using.
I steep the wool in a cauldron of pomegranates afloat in urine. I river water thrice boiled with a bloodstone of the fist of wizard beard and rock tribe. Yields a dye enough the whole time to paint.
Wizardbeard and rock tripe are two species of lichen historically used for dye, and oak galls have been used for dyes and ink since around the 5th century, and was actually the standard recipe for ink up until the 19th century. Production of this ink required tannins acquired from boiling these gall nuts, and then adding some iron. In this case, the weaver gets this iron from a bloodstone, which is a mineral containing iron oxide. I couldn't really find any reliable sources on what the urine is for, but one thing I do know is that Richard Dawson is probably the only person to deliver the word urine so beautifully. Anyways, while brewing together this ink, the weaver looks into their cauldron.
It looks like a thundercloud suspended from the gables high above the bobbing heads, which now and then look up to see what's taking on them.
It's as though the weaver imagines they are creating a small world inside of this cauldron. They see the oak galls as small people and themselves as a sort of creator god, making this thunderstorm above them. And in a way, the weaver likens their craft, as well as creativity in general, to the power a god has to create. In the second half of the song, then, the weaver has a life-changing experience.
My lady takes a nasty tumble down the crumbled steps of the merchant's guild, precipitating the early onset of labor. With lies bounded by your string. I can the rising mystery of love, my very ancient friend.
The weaver witnesses a woman going into childbirth and in an act of compassion helps the mother deliver. This spontaneous and beautiful moment is something the weaver will never forget, probably. Richard uses the word ken here, which is a word used mostly in Scottish and some Northern English. It typically means to know or understand something deeply. For the Danes out there, it's probably related to the word kin, if that helps anything. Either way, it seems that the weaver finally understands unconditional love after witnessing the miracle of childbirth, and it's a compelling parallel between creativity and birth. And I think there's an interesting connection with the protagonist being a weaver specifically. In Norse mythology, there is a group of deities known as the Norns. And the Norns are so-called weavers of fate. They sit at the foot of Yggdrasil, where they tend to a network of golden threads, each of these threads corresponding to a human life. And the Norns have the power to manipulate these threads and cut them short however they like. It is said when a child is born, a Norn will come and visit and determine the child's fate, which is a rather interesting connection to the song, where a weaver is a protagonist aiding the birth of a child. And I think it's symbolic that the weaver describes the baby as dangling from a string. And in Norse mythology, it's said that there are many Norns, but there are three sort of main ones, which are the ones who sit beneath Yggdrasil. Their names are Ogre, Verdandi, and Skuld. All three of these names somehow pertaining to fate or destiny. And there's a general association with these three to the past, present, and future as well. Verdandi is a word that has the connotation of the present, and Skuld is a word associated with how things should or are going to be. The name Uther is a bit more complicated and doesn't really have anything to do with the past. I guess you could argue it just has something to do with something being old in general, but that's mythology for you. It gets messy sometimes. But the connection of past, present, and future does sound awfully familiar, doesn't it? And a lot of things are lining up here with the connection to the Norns. And I mean, the Anglians of Brunech were North Germanic tribes, so it's not unlikely they brought some of their myths with them.
In this day and age, it's hard to explain.
This song laments the tragic life of a sex worker, to put it short. It appears she was sold into slavery as a young child, by her very own parents even. Relating back to the song Ogre, it's clear that slavery and human trafficking were probably common around this time.
There has to be more than this. Is there no reason for me to exist, but for as a plaything of miscreants, malingerers, dastards and knaves? How is it so? A child can be bought for a year's worth of grain.
We're then informed that the girl's father died in a violent accident. Her widowed mother, so desperate to survive, then decided to resort to selling her own child to sex slavery.
I'll never forget the scene where the freckled jowls contort across my father's face and disappear under the wheels of the cart. Then the sky parts, a pillar of rain.
It sounds like an ancient problem, right? Needing to sell your own child to live. But in fact, this is still very much going on. Statistics estimate that around 10 million child prostitutes are in the world right now, likely in the industry for similar reasons to the protagonist of this story. Luckily for our protagonist, she gets the opportunity of a way out, something most of these children don't get.
To the death on a dummy of puke. I stole this horse, old speckled brown face, from the royal tannery. the border.
It's rather symbolic that the horse she steals is from a tannery. This horse was meant to be slaughtered, but in saving herself from slavery, the horse is also saved with her. And then she flees the kingdom entirely, perhaps the only salvation from this nightmare. And the way the prostitute rides off very much reminds me of the way the soldier rides off as well. And I guess in some way they both are escaping their respective wars.
Failing to hide a tail stripe, following more with the cusp of night.
Okay, the last song was rather depressing, so how about something a bit more whimsical up in here? Just the guitar work in general, there's so much whimsy and fun to it. Just listen. Is that how you hit the grid? Our protagonist isn't having as much fun though.
Leaving the path, lured by an emerald, I wander into the bog of names. Now I'm stuck fast, carved sorry hedges, goblets of white rubies on my chin, and way away through the soil, all the roots will join me to forge the bough of the tree. Away to the
So my man is just walking along this path, and I guess his greed just sort of distracts him, and before he knows it, he's stuck in the bog. And somehow the tree roots start enveloping him, slowly drowning him in the swampy water. And I think at least some of this is sort of just him hallucinating right before he's dying and drowning in the swampy water, right?
Out of the gloom, a figure approaches, wrapped in a garment of northern light. Heaves me free, gives me a potato, escorts me to the edge of town, then turns on the heel.
His mind hallucinates this strange being that comes and saves him, likely the titular Shapeshifter. And now, when I first listened to this, I noticed two anachronistic elements. First, they talk about the Hall of Clouds, which is easily read as the Christian idea of heaven, right? But then I investigated a bit further, and it seems that Roman Catholicism was actually rather well spread in England around these times, so that checks out. What doesn't check out, however, is the mention of a potato. Potatoes, if you don't know, are native to the Americas, and they didn't make their way to Europe until about 1,000 years after this song supposedly takes place. What is this potato even doing here? I mean, Richard seems to have his historical details in check most of the time, so this must be intentional, right? Perhaps this theme of past, present, and future not being so different goes deeper than I thought. I could see the potato as being a sort of flash forward to colonialism and the British Empire, perhaps. Seeing as the song is a story of a person succumbing to their own guilt is not that much of a stretch, is it? I mean, it's funny how we tend to forget where potatoes even came from. Like, they're so synonymous with European cooking now, right? And we never really address just how new they are. Something I skipped over in the Ogre song is a verse where the protagonist seemingly has a dream of skyscrapers.
Blinding colors lead along the mirrored tower walls, stretching as far as the eye can see.
Perhaps the past and present are collapsing already here. It's something that definitely becomes more prevalent in further into the trilogy, so I can't write it off completely at least.
I have loved this strange contraption over many a holy tale of the gate.
The word scientist seems to be another rather intentional anachronism here. Now, in general, the language throughout this album needs a bit of suspense of disbelief to make sense. Otherwise, the whole record would have to be sung in Old English, and I don't think there's a market for that. But Richard could have easily called this inventor or something, right? The word scientist wasn't used until the 1800s, let alone science only came into use around the 1300s. I think I'll get more into the implications of this after we're done with all the songs, so stay tuned for that. There's a bigger picture here, I think. Our protagonist in this song is a sort of inventor, and he's come to the king to show off his newest contraption, but it isn't exactly well received. Historically, those who dared to think differently were often shunned by the public, right? Even when they are fully correct. In the 1500s, a man by the name of Giordano Bruno was a firm supporter of the idea that the sun was actually in the center of the universe and not the earth. The Catholic Church then proceeded to burn him on the stake on account of blasphemy. Scientists today warn of global warming and how we need to try and prevent it, yet many write it off as fear-mongering and proceed to do jack shit instead. And now look at these lyrics in comparison. In local Northumbrian folklore, hobs are a type of household spirit, or in general just some type of little goblin, and hobs are said to live in these so-called hob holes, and this is the scene where the song starts.
We ascended the foaming stair to the mouth of the hob-thrust cave, decanted the hop wine from an nanny's throat.
It seems our protagonists are performing some sort of sacrifice to the hob. The word nanny is an old term for a female goat, and similarly to the goose scene from earlier, Richard just has the wildest way of describing things, especially when it comes to cutting throats. Anyway, it is then revealed what the sacrifice is for.
Our baby's lips are blue, our baby's eyes grow dim. Take it off, take it off, take it off, whooping cough.
It seems that this is directly borrowed from a tradition in Yorkshire. One of the most famous hob holes is located in Runswick Bay in northern Yorkshire. The whooping cough, as is mentioned, is an illness common in children causing a terrible cough that lasts so long that they gave it the title of the 100-day cough. And historically, parents would bring their children to the Runswick hob hole under the belief that the hob could cure this cough. They would then recite these following words: "Hob hole hob, me bairn's gotten kink cough. Take it off, which is pretty much exactly what Richard sings. Of course, the child in our story seems a bit more sick than just having a cough, on account of the blue lips, for example. And after their offering to the hob, the family goes home, where it's revealed that they have an older child. And it seems there's some funky gender thing going on here. They also seem to be able to see the future.
He is strong with the second sign, round these parts held in some renown, using words not his own, he voraciously foretold. At the murmur of dawn, there's a knock at the door, and a small man standing by. I have come to collect what is rightfully owed. Rouse the
Hey, slightly future Joe here. See, we're passing through time. It seems that there's a part of this song that I just kind of completely misunderstood, and that's on my part, really. Basically, in the following verses that I was just going to talk about, I had, like, confused the gender of the children. Basically, I, for some reason, thought that they were using both female and male pronouns for the same person in reference to the eldest child. But actually, the feminine pronouns refer to the eldest child, and the masculine pronouns refer back to the sick child. And I, for some reason, thought that this was some sort of gender fluid person in the medieval times, right? And it's simply just not. It would have been cool if it was, but it's not, okay? I think I just completely failed to recognize that there was a passage of time between verses, like a large passage of time. So what I thought happened was that they sort of sacrificed one child for the other, rather than the child growing up and then the child getting claimed later. So it's actually the sick child that could also see the future and not the eldest child, which I thought. So, yeah. Throughout history, it's been believed that some people have this gift of precognition, and typically was associated with dreams. The oracles of ancient Greece are a good example of this, and it seems that the titular Hob is very interested in this prophetic child. The twist of this story is very similar to a Grimm Brothers tale named Rumpelstiltskin. To sum up the fairy tale, there's this miller with a beautiful daughter. One day, the miller is talking to the king, and for some fucking reason, he says that his daughter can spin straw into gold. And so the king is like, oh yeah? Prove it. And so the miller's daughter is put into a room with a spinner and some straw, and the king goes, if this is not all gold by tomorrow, I'll kill you. The Grimm brothers weren't very chill, okay? And spoiler alert, the girl can actually not spin straw into gold, so instead she breaks down crying on the floor. But then suddenly a small man enters the room, and then he goes, I'll help you out in exchange for your necklace. And so the girl agrees and the deal is done. Later, the king orders the girl to then make even more gold. Same thing happens, and then she gives the small man a ring. And one more time the king demands even more gold from the girl, and he promises that if she spins all of this straw into gold, he'll marry her. This time, however, the girl doesn't have anything to bargain with the small man to turn the straw into gold again. How about you just obey your firstborn child? And the girl agrees. And well, then she grows up, has children, and the guy takes her child. There's more to this story, but I think this is the part that inspired it. I just wanted to tell a little story. So in short, both Rumpelstiltskin and the song about the Hob are both sort of cautionary tales about seeking short-term gratification in spite of long-term consequences. And I know all about that now. Moving on.
He's fast asleep at Woden's feet.
Beggar is the tragic tale of a man and his dog.
If you rely on the kindness of strangers, have a home for a handmaid. Often people stop to talk with me, having never seen before such a very beautiful
The image of a homeless person with a dog is still a common sight today. Often owning a pet seems to have a very positive impact for people who don't have anything else. But as the protagonist says, people are more often so more interested in the dog rather than the person sitting right next to it. I've heard so many stories of people saying that homeless people are not allowed to have dogs and they need to be saved, and they give the dogs food instead of the owners and stuff like that. And it's just a sad reality that people care more about dogs than the human person right in front of them. Anyway, the rest of the song follows some harsh events. The beggar finds his dog having a seizure, and the dog is just sick and weak in general. And of course, it gets worse from here. The beggar's village is attacked by raiders, and his dog once again runs from his side in fear, and the beggar was unable to save her this time. And it's implied that the dog is somehow injured.
I sold my shoes so I could buy a chicken, a penance on the tree. On the final day, now she is gone. I carry
Beggar has lost everything. His best friend, the only thing keeping him sane, the only reason strangers even talk to him, it's all gone now. All because he was too scared to try and save her. Shit, man. On this penultimate track, our protagonist is no one. It's just this ominous instrumental track, and it's rather unsettling to listen to. On each album of this trilogy, the second to last songs are all called No One, each of them following the same formula, and this is the most obvious hint to all these albums being connected.
Fortune wags its tongue.
We end our medieval journey on a 10-minute epic titled Masseuse. Richard has also given it the alternate title of The Pin of Quib, and you'll see why.
They say the monk returned from Iceland on earthly moon in stone. He who possesses the pin of quib is granted eternal beauty.
I believe this intro alludes to the Papal of Iceland. In the Icelandic sagas, there are mentions of Gaelic monks living on Iceland that had supposedly already lived on the islands before Scandinavian settlers came in the 9th century. Pretty cool, actually. Also, note from the first verse, what the hell is a pin of quib? From what I could find, quib is a word of Latin origin, meaning something along the lines of a joke. The word is still used today, but as a quip instead, with a P. Ending it with a B instead is an outdated spelling. A more common word that is derived from this one is quibble, which has two meanings. The more modern meaning is an argument based on something trivial, and an older meaning is sort of an early term for a pun. And with all the double meanings going on here, I think that's just very fitting. Let's keep all these meanings in mind as we continue. We cut to our protagonist, the titular masseuse, who is pretty dang tired of their job. Eternal beauty is something that the protagonist thinks will make their life much easier. And well, society is still that way. Being good looking has and always will have some unfair advantages over others. So this masseuse is gonna risk it all to obtain this fabled eternal beauty. So in other terms, they're trying to look maxing.
I go on mouse toes into the blind man's chamber, and leaning over his bed, I push the blade between his ribs, but then in a flash he's got my wrist and he's pinned me to the floor.
Our protagonist's looks-maxing journey takes a turn for the worse, though. It's revealed that the monk who had the pin is blind, and the monk is also described as very disgusting. So for someone who bears eternal beauty, he sounds like one disgusting motherfucker. But anyway, the monk offers to show the pin to our protagonist.
He fishes a brooch of plain pea of stone, and I can hardly believe how very ordinary it seems. Then it dawns on me, it was all mere folly.
As foreshadowed by its name, the pin of quib is a farce, a joke, useless, trivial, whatever you want to call it. But yet the story of it drives people to murder to even just obtain it. The monk saying that he must take the masseuse's eyes to complete the circle informs us that the monk had the same thing happen to him, and that's why he's blind now. But anyway, in the next verse, the masseuse appears to agree to this deal somehow, and there's then a certain irony to the pin of quib. Everyone pursues it for its supposed eternal beauty that it grants, but at the price of your own vision, such that you can never enjoy your own beautiful appearance. Perhaps the monk was under the belief that he had obtained this eternal beauty. I mean, how would he even know? And the same thing has now happened to the masseuse. And it's an interesting commentary. The lengths people go to just to become more attractive. The whole looks-maxing meme wave is something that pokes fun at this. And I mean, think of all the botched plastic surgeries out there, and the people who can no longer exude facial expressions on the account of Botox. What is it all for? In general, the worth we tie to our appearance is such a strange practice. The people out there who truly appreciate you for who you are, they don't care about your looks. At least they shouldn't. You don't need to looks max to be loved, okay? There are people who appreciate you for who you are. So, that was Peasant, an experience that has you look 1600 years into the past, only to see it looks like a mirror. No matter what time period we're in, the same human struggles will always persist. It's sort of a unifying feeling at times to connect with the emotionally anxious soldier, the creative weaver, or the misunderstood scientist. Of course, there are also just as many ugly sides that still persist. Greed, war, xenophobia, slavery, prostitution. Both the pretty and ugly sides of humanities are unmoved in the passage of time. Throughout Peasant, there are all of these sort of out-of-place glimpses of the future. In The Hob, we had a child with precognition. Often dreams are believed to be able to foretell the future, which is interesting since we see the protagonist in Ogre having a dream of skyscrapers. Right? We have the potato appearing in 6th century England, foreshadowing the greed that would overcome them during their time as an empire, and we have a scientist 1,000 years before science as a concept even existed. And it seems time throughout this trilogy of albums is already bending here. And I think it's very fitting with the theme of history repeating itself a lot. That time is sort of just melding together at some points. It's something that's definitely more predominant in the Ruby chord, but I think it's cool to see peek through already here. And I think that's it for me. This is probably the video I have most fun researching with, at least. I knew nothing about this record before I began. I had listened to the Ruby chord a couple times, and then I heard it was part of a trilogy, so of course I wanted to check that out. And the idea of a video covering all of the three then came to mind, but it seemed that Peasant just had so much content on its own that it could make its own standalone video. But judging by how fun this was, I think there's a lot more to look into in 2020 and the Ruby chord as well, so perhaps prepare for those sometime in the future. Thanks for watching. Is that how you hit the gritty? I don't know.